How's it going, my friends? Thanks for joining us on another part of the PSM Mini Masterclass. This one is all about Process Safety Information, or PSI for short. So what is Process Safety Information? This is a great question. It's really broad, but basically it's all the documentation that has everything to do with anything related to hazards associated with operating the process. And that's pretty broad. So let me give some examples of this. You certainly are going to have like process chemistry. So whatever chemicals you have on site, including hydrocarbons, including like just anything that you have flowing through your pipes or storing in a container, there needs to be like an SDS. So some kind of safety data sheet that reveals the toxicity, the lower explosion limits, the safe exposure limit, the short-term exposure limit, all that kind of toxicity information, reactivity, what stuff to watch out for so you don't mix it or bang it, how like stable is it, all that kind of information related to chemicals needs to be included in your process safety information. And you need to make sure that there's an inadvertent mixing table. So in case somebody accidentally puts two chemicals together, they need to know whether or not something is going to result from that and what are the measures that are preventing that from happening. So some of that's going to be documentation on like how you're storing it. Some of it's going to be documentation on how you're processing chemicals, and it's going to involve safety interlocks to prevent human error from mixing different things. So that's on like the chemical side, but also on process conditions side. What are the normal temperatures, pressures, flow rates that you are anticipating at every step of your process? This needs to be captured in something called a process flow diagram, a PFD, so that someone could take a glance at it and high level see, okay, here's the beginning, here's all the unit operations, and here's the end. And so here's all the feedstocks and the temperatures and pressures and flow rates. So I can kind of see it and map it out in my mind. And that way any employee or contractor could quickly glance at something and get a pretty good sense for what they're dealing with if they're working on or around a certain area. All right, so there needs to be, again, those temperatures, pressures, flow rates, but also what happens if things are outside the normal. What's outside what you are expecting, and people call that the consequences of deviation or the normal operating conditions. And so sometimes they mix those, sometimes they're separate documents. We've seen it done different ways in different industries. It kind of depends on your specific situation. But in a nutshell, it's trying to show anyone who is going to work in or around this facility, look, we expect it to be these operating conditions, and if it's outside of that, then here's the safety interlocks that are going to begin to respond. Here's the alarms that are going to trip at these different points. Here's the automatic depressurizing systems. Here's the emergency shutdowns that are going to happen. And this all needs to be documented and understood and communicated. And so you can begin to see that this one element of the process safety management program is big, right? There's a ton of data and information there for good reasons too. I mean, you're working in very complicated facilities that's producing valuable but very hazardous things. And so in order to keep everyone safe and to keep the environment safe and keep your assets safe, then all this needs to be captured, documented, and understood and communicated. Okay? And it's not just that, right? Like people need to know the detail too. So there's something called P&IDs, or process and instrumentation diagrams, and that's going to show really detail about flow paths and where things are going, all the vessels and what comes off the top and the bottom and the middle and heat exchangers and all that kind of stuff. Included in process safety information is also information on equipment. So rotating equipment, pumps, blowers, fans, compressors. It's going to have the manufacturer's manuals, right, on how you operate it, on how you evaluate the mechanical integrity, on how often you service it. So it's huge and bulky, and I could go on and on and on. Again, in our full masterclass, we take a look at different industries and the most common forms of PSI and what you need to look out for so that you're taken care of. But what I want to communicate here is that I just take a moment and imagine that it's your responsibility to keep track of process safety information, right? Maybe you're a plant manager, maybe you're a lead operator, maybe you're a PSM coordinator, and it's your responsibility to be the master of all this documentation. and I want you to imagine that at any given moment, people are wanting to make updates or changes, or we're hiring someone new and need to train them. And all of this has to relate with what you're in charge of, right? Your PSI. How hard is it to keep track of all that stuff? You with me, right? Have you ever wondered if it's possible for one person to keep track of all the PSI so that it never gets out of date, or if it does, it gets updated in a hurry? Well, we've wondered that too, because we, like you, have been in operating companies, right? Me personally, I started in my very first role, I was an operator. So that's how I started. And I can appreciate what it's like to try to always interact with and keep up to date the process safety information, because all of us have spent that time where you're at and we know the frustration. We've developed a really good system for our clients on how you make sure that you stay up to date all the time with PSI. So there's some really good tools, some great enterprise software. Some of them have some really low cost, and some even have some free versions to them that you can implement now that will help you keep track of all the PSI. And certainly the reason why, bottom line, it's important for you to keep track of all your PSI because it contains safety information. It truly protects people when you keep all that stuff in order, and it's easy for you to share it with people. But also, whenever, according to the PSM program, you have to audit all of this documentation at given intervals. And if it's out of date, and if it's all paper copies and they're strewn around, or they're in job books at the different facilities, and they're not accessible, then every single time you have to try to update things, it's going to be a bear. And you know this because you're probably thinking of the pile of this kind of paperwork that's on your desk right now that you're just like, good heavens, how am I going to update this? Hey, stay with me because we've been there. We know what this feels like. And so one of our services that we've done for clients is we've helped them digitize all that documentation, because in today's day and age, in modern society, we really don't need to be dealing in paper anymore. It's okay to have paper accessible as maybe a hard copy that's available. But when you're talking about the turnover that happens with employees, they need to be cross-trained here and there, and consultants that come in to help you with your PSM program, or contractors that come and they need access to certain things, it's just too much for one person to be handling all of this hard paperwork, right? In today's day and age, there's some really elegant tools and systems that just with a couple of clicks, everyone's got everything that they need to know. And anytime something's updated, everyone's aware of it. Just like that. So imagine a world in which that's happening for you in your operation. And if you're curious about how to do that, please join us for our full masterclass. You can find it again. And we take some deep dive into those tools. Or certainly book a consult with us, and we'd be more than happy to talk about your specific operation and what tools would be most appropriate and most cost effective. And we promise that when we do, again, we do this all the time. We've looked at every tool that's out there. And so our commitment to you is no nonsense, right? And that's what this mini masterclass is all about, is to demystify stuff and to take the fluff out so that you can get back to what you want to do most, which is operate. And do it safely and do it well. So again, thanks for joining us on this element of PSI. We'd love to see you in the full masterclass, but certainly we'll see you in the next video. Thanks.